Well, Hernan, thank you very much. We're really excited to have you share some insights with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Susan, Sunny, everybody at CETF. And thank you for all the partners for coming and the board of experts as well. We're very excited to share our findings and find ways to collaborate. We have so many common goals that we want to achieve, so it'd be great to find ways to collaborate. I feel like in the first day of class, because in the first day of class, all the students, for some reason, they don't want to see
they're not allowed.
Let me start with a quick outline of what we're going to be presenting. So first, we're going to give an overview of what the project that we call Connected Communities and Inclusive Growth, what's it about. Then we're going to present some results, first from California as a whole, to put California into context. Then talk about where and who are the Californians that remain unconnected. And then we're going to have a sort of a dive down in Los Angeles and show you some of the community case studies that we've been working on. So more preaching to the choir, but I think it's important that we set some common framework for what we are trying to achieve. We conceive the internet as a public utility, the public utility of the 21st century. The internet, it's like electricity and the roads in the 20th century. Without internet, we will not achieve the goals of improving education, of creating more jobs, of reducing inequality, all those goals that we share for communities in California and around the United States and around the world. These will not happen without robust, open, and affordable internet. So that's our main goal for the project. How do we support this common goal? And the goal is not just availability. And this is something we're talking with Sunny at the beginning. It's not enough to have the infrastructure on the ground. You need to have affordable services, and you need people with skills to be able to use those, use the infrastructure effectively for their own goals. So we very much align with CETF and all of you, I believe, in terms of the idea of a holistic approach. It's not just about bringing the connectivity, it's also about making it affordable and improving and providing skills for kids, for people, for the elderly, for everyone to use this technology effectively. And that requires coordination, which a lot of times is the hardest thing to do, is the coordination, not just with infrastructure, with digital literacy, with affordability, with raising awareness. I know many of you are working on this, and this is sometimes the very difficult part, is the coordination of this holistic approach. And third, we really believe that, yes, this is a question that a lot of times is a federal level question. Of course, the FCC matters. Of course, the discussion about net neutrality and the Lifeline program, especially now that the FCC is, let's put it gently, taking a reverse course on many of the things that happened in the last decade. It matters, but there's so much that can be done at the state level and so much that can be done at the local level, the community level, at the level of the school districts, at the level of communities. So we really believe that there is a top-down policy that matters, but there's also bottom-up initiatives that matter. And we, as a project, want to partner and support these initiatives. So what do we do? Our goal, more specific goal, is to map and to analyze digital inequality at the local community level and offer our analysis and data tools for others to use. So we develop a data visualization tool that I'm going to show you in a minute, which aggregates and provides all the data for anybody to use. Where's our data coming from? So we're essentially right now working with two data sets. One is on the availability side, we use CPUC data, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. The CPUC data that is essentially collected from the ISPs, which provides at the level of the census block who is providing what kind of services at what kind of speed across California. So So we use that as our availability data, but I think what we're most excited is the combination of this CPUC data with the adoption data that comes from the ACS. So just to take a minute about the ACS. The ACS is the largest program, other than the census, is the largest program of the Census Bureau. Every year, it samples about 1% of Americans, which in California means about 350,000 people. So it's a large sample that is collected through the ACS. And in 2013, it's the first time that the ACS actually started asking about internet. So from 2013 to 2016, which is the latest number that we have an interesting amount of data about that ask people essentially three things. We have very limited data. The ACS asks whether there is an internet connection at home, what kind of connection, is it wireless, is it wired, is it DSL, is it cable, is it fiber, and what device is being used. It's a laptop, a PC, a smartphone. And that's it. So it's a very small set of data, but it's a type of data that can be very precise for estimations at the very local level and for very specific population, because the sample is so large that we can do very precise estimations at the local level and for very specific populations. And we can combine all this data with other socioeconomic data, all the data that is captured in the ACS. And what we're going to show you today is data that just came out. Literally a few weeks ago, the Census Bureau released the 2016 ACS data. So this is probably going to be your first, you're going to be literally the first ones to look at this data or analysis that we did based on this that just came out a few weeks ago. We also, as Ellen mentioned, we are also working with partners in London, in Shanghai, in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and many other cities which are facing the same issues of digital inequality, the same issues of how do we provide this infrastructure, space infrastructure. So it's also interesting because we can have all these comparisons for the challenges that not only LA and not only California, but many other cities and countries are engaged. So let me start with big picture where California is in the US context. It's a little small, the print, but I put California in red. So this is just basic home internet penetration in California. According to the ACS, in 2016, we are at 85.7, which puts us 8th in the country. It's obviously not bad. Now, it's where you expect California to be in many ways. So this is plotting home internet penetration, the same number, but also GDP per capita in each of the states. And you can see the trend line, and you can see that California is sitting right where you expect it to sit, right around the trend line. So yes, we are 8th in the country in connectivity, but we are also 8th in the country in wealth. So in a way, we are where you would expect us to be in terms of our wealth. Now, the interesting issue, I want to put it that way, because I just heard Susan with a very ambitious goal of 500,000. 500,000. The reality is growth has slowed. It has slowed considerably in the last years. So this is change between 2013 and 2016 in all the states. And as you can see, California is in the middle towards the low end, which means growth in California in home connectivity has slowed. It's slower than other states. We've in numbers, in between 2013 and 2016, 1.1 million new households have been connected. So it's about 350 100,000 new households per year that have been connected. But it's slowing. And this is something that we've seen in many other technologies. This is, in fact, a pattern that we've seen in many other technologies. After the 80% mark, growth tends to slow down. So in many ways, it's something to be expected, that the remaining 20% is often the most difficult to get. It's the most difficult. And again, we've seen this not just with the internet, with the mobile phones, with computers, with in fact, many other technologies that are different from the internet. We've seen that after the last 20% is very difficult to get at. In the case of the internet, why? In part because these are the rural and low density areas which are hard to develop the infrastructure, and the infrastructure hasn't been upgraded, hasn't been developed yet. So that's part of the problem. But as I'll show you, most of the households that remain unconnected in California, they are urban households, and they live in very densely populated areas. So yes, we have a problem we still have challenges in the rural and low density areas, but in the big picture, the real problem is actually right here, right around urban areas like Los Angeles. So, where are the unconnected Californians and who are they? So this is the map. And let me just take a minute to talk about a small but important technicality. What is a puma? So it's not an animal. It's a puma is how the census office presents this results. They're presented by puma. So pumas are areas that are at least 100,000 people that are nested within states. They tend to be nested within counties, but not always, because some counties are too small, they're not 100,000, so some pumas are more than just one county. But they tend to be nested in counties and in states. And California has has 265 pumas in California. So here what I'm showing to you is the rate of internet adoption by pumas in California. And you can see the scale where you go from 60s and low 70s in the light blue areas to the 90s in the dark blue areas. Probably no surprises here, right? Probably no surprises. You have low connectivity areas in the Central Valley. You have low connectivity in the southeast areas. And you have low connectivity in the north part of California. So these are the classic isolated, more rural areas that are more difficult to connect. So these are some of the low connectivity areas that we have in California. Now, if you notice, we also have areas of very light blue within very densely populated areas like Los Angeles, in particular Los Angeles. In fact, the least connected community, defined as a puma, the least connected community in all California is a few miles from here. That's Westmont in South Los Angeles. So it's one of the pumas in South Los Angeles called Westmont. It's the least connected area in the entire California. So these are. So these are the actual numbers that I'm not expecting anybody to be able to read those labels, but the lowest one here, it's LA South Central Westmont. So it's the least connected community in all California. And in fact, the five, so this is a zoom. So I'm zooming on the bottom 10 of the big graph. This is just the bottom 10 of that long graph. So now you can probably read some of the labels. If not, I can read to you. Here are the 5 least connected communities in all California. Westmont in South Central, Stockton South, East Los Angeles, Coachella and Indo, and then again, South Central Watts. So 4 of the 5 least connected communities in California are urban, dense environments. The only one that you expect, oh yes, this is the typical difficult to connect urban, rural, and slightly isolated area is the Indo-Coachella area. 4 of the 5 are urban, densely populated areas. So this really brings home the point, and illustrates the point that our challenges are not just on the outer edges of the rural areas and the low density areas that are very much around here, particularly around Los Angeles. Los Angeles, 3 of those 5 areas are East Los Angeles and South Central Los Angeles. A lot is about income, yes. So we did the same exercise that we did for states. These are for the pumas, for the communities. we plotted internet penetration along with wealth. In this case is median household income. And you see, obviously, the curve is tracking pretty well, but it's not just about income, because look where South Central LA is, or Westmont, in fact. It's at least 10 percentage points below where you expect it to be. So it's not just income. Yes, it's income, but it's also race, it's jobs, and it's employment, it's community development, it's all the things that make communities be able to create initiatives and connectivity initiatives in particular. So income is explaining quite a bit of what we see in the results, yes, but there's a lot more than just income or wealth. So now we move on into characterizing who are the Californians that are unconnected. And again, probably you're not surprised to hear this. They tend to be older, they're low income, Black or Hispanic, and people with disabilities. So this is the typical characterization of the unconnected California. So let me start with age. In fact, in age, I think there's some good news. We've seen quite a spike. So I'm comparing the baseline that we have, which is 2013 and 2016. And you see quite a spike in connectivity in 65 plus, so the older adults connecting, over a 10% point increase in those 3 years. They're still at 75%, but they're catching up slowly, but catching up with the rest of the groups, which are on 90+%. So we do still have a challenge connecting older adults, but they're certainly making interesting progress. This is by income. So what we did here is divide the households in according to their income in groups of 10, equal groups of 10. So you have the income deciles. And you can see that the real challenge is the bottom 20%. The bottom 20% is where the real problems are in connectivity. You have 58, 70, because in the third you're already up to 80. And in the fourth you're already up to 85, which is the average for California. So this again illustrates the idea that the real challenge is concentrating in the bottom 20% of the poorest households. So this is looking at it in terms of income deciles, that is dividing the population in equal number of groups according to their income. Now if we look at what's called low income, and again this is a point of discussion because it really depends on what you call low income. So we use a quite typical definition, which is used by many agencies in California, which is we consider low income whoever has an income of equal or less than 80% of the median household income. So that's our definition of low income, which is again used by many government agencies in California. There are other definitions. Pew uses 30,000 per year as a national. There's many ways to define it. We use this definition, which again we think is more reasonable for California. So what you see when you divide low income and the rest, you see that actually there's been an interesting catch up. With low income jumping from 63 to 74, with the rest jumping from 90 to 94. So you can see those curves start to converge, correct? So you see there's a little bit of a catch up happening, which is good news. Now I would argue it is good news, but it's mostly driven by mobile-only households. Is for the most part driven by people signing up to cheap smartphone-based data plans. So these are the mobile-only households by income decile. So again, dividing the population in 10 groups of equal number of people according to their income. And as you can see, about 1 in 4 people in the bottom 20% are mobile-only households. So there's a strong preference for this type of connectivity in the poorest 20%, which again indicates that much of those gains that we've seen in closing the divide between low income and the rest have to do with the big jump in mobile-only households. In fact, when you simply calculate what this represents in terms of the overall connectivity of this group, in the bottom 10%, almost half of the households that are connected are mobile only. So again, strong preference for this type of plans among this poorest population. And you know, we get into the discussion, or rather, we could get into the discussion of whether mobile and wired are substitutes or they're complements. We so far believe more in the argument that is laid out by the FCC in the Home Broadband Report, and it's been also laid out by many competition agencies, that right now, up until now, mobile and wire are different markets. They're different services, they serve different purposes. It's something that we need to debate about, and if we believe the 5G promises everything's going to change with 5G, maybe it will, we don't know. But for now, we consider, or we side with the FCC and with many competition authorities which have looked at this and concluded they are different markets, they are not substitutes, they're complements. So what we do is we take out those mobile-only households from the analysis, and we look at whether low-income households are really catching up. So when you take out the mobile-only households and you look whether the low-income population is really catching up, there's no real catch-up. You can see those lines, low-income and other households, they are essentially parallel. Which means that once you take out the mobile-only households, you really don't see convergence between the low-income population and the rest of the population, as you see when you include those mobile-only households. And there's many examples of this, but I just want to mention a story that was printed in one of the Long Beach newspapers. Long Beach did a great series of stories which featured Sunny, our work as well, working on what it means for Long Beach in terms of the digital divide and some of the implications. And they really, I think they really got it right when they focused not so much on the digital divide, but on the outcomes, on what happens when you don't have connectivity. And one of the leads on one story was a story about a family, a Latino family, that was wanted to apply for Section 8 housing. And they knew that day was the first day that you could apply, but all the applications had to be online. And they didn't have a computer at home, so they went to the library, but they had to wait until the library opened, which was before the opening of the actual application time. But finally they got to the library, they used the computer, but they had a 30-minute limit on the computer use, which was enough to fulfill the application. So they had to wait for somebody else to use the computer and then resume the application. So it really good illustration of the fact that today we still need more than just a cheap smartphone data plan for achieving the real goals that we've been discussing. So again, I suggest you all look at the stories, a really great series of stories coming out of Long Beach that really illustrates this point very well. Let's look at race. So race is also an interesting story. We see, so blue line being white non-Hispanic, red being black, and green being Hispanic. So you see interesting catch-up among Hispanic population, but not so much, in fact, not at all with the black population. So we see interesting different dynamics happening in terms of race. And of course, much of the catch-up of the Hispanic population has to do with mobile only. So these are the mobile only numbers for Hispanic, black, and white non-Hispanic. And as you can see, there's a heavy concentration of Hispanic in mobile only, more than 20%. So much of this catch-up, the same story as the low income. Much of the catch-up that Hispanics we're observing on Hispanics is due to mobile only plans. And last, we'll just have a quick slide on disabilities. We look at disability, and you see that the lines are running parallel between people with disabilities and the rest of the population. But there's been an interesting jump from 67 to 79, so an interesting jump in the population with disabilities. This is something that we haven't looked very carefully, but we are very interested in working with some of the partners here in looking at this specific population. So just to conclude, let me just give you a quick overview of some of the case studies we're looking in Los Angeles, and let me show you the tool. So this is how our tool looks online, and there's all of you that have a computer connected, you can go into this URL. It's tiny.cc/broadbandla. That should take you to this visualization tool. And on the right, you have all of the different layers of the tool. You can look at, this is the internet home adoption, but you can look at computers, computer ownership, smartphone ownership. You can look at poverty rates. You can look at education. You can look at all the indicators that are in the ACS. And you can combine them in different ways. So just to give you a snapshot of what it looks like, and please give us some feedback. We are always trying to improve this tool. So some of the cases that we are more interested in looking at, of course, one is South LA, because it's the least minority community in California. And the interesting thing in South LA is it's really not just about one factor. It's what we call the intersectionality of factors. It's a combination of factors. It's a high poverty area. It's mostly racial minorities, high incidence of disability. So you have this perfect storm of all the factors that make connectivity challenging in South LA. So we're trying to find partnerships and working with in this area, because again, it's the area that's most facing the challenges in all California. We also, one of our students is actually working on Boyle Heights. One of our students has particular interest in Boyle Heights. It's a very interesting neighborhood. It's also one of the least connected. It's part of East LA, literally just a few blocks from here. It's a little bit higher, the connectivity rates, but the interesting thing in Boyle Heights is you have a combination as well of a lot of non-English speaking households. So our students really interested in looking at what happens when you have not only poverty and minorities and disability, but also a very high number of non-English speaking households. So one of the students is taking a deep dive on in East LA. So I want to open up for questions, but just quickly, what are our next steps in this project? First, of course, continue to update the analysis and visualization tool as new data comes along. So as new data becomes available, we're really hoping to have the new CPUC numbers soon that we can combine with the ACS numbers that we already have for 2016. So every time we're trying to update and keep our tool updated. We also want to partner with local organizations, perhaps some of you, because we really want to do community case studies. The nice thing about our data is not just look at California, not just look at the counties. You can look at specific communities. You can look at Long Beach, you can look at Boyle Heights, you can look at whatever community. We have the ability to really dig deeper into data and have a diagnosis of what is the connectivity situation, what are the challenges, what are the needs in each local community. We're also excited about developing case studies of not communities, but specific populations. As I mentioned, one of them is people with disabilities. And we also put on a grant that's, I think it's probably one of, if we get it, I'm a little bit ambivalent, I should say, because I really want to get this grant, but at the same time, I know it's going to be so challenging, is understanding internet access and use among the homeless, which is in LA, which is a community in itself. We're talking about 60,000 people. So it's almost a Puma. It's a community itself. But so challenging to study, but at the same time, so interesting. All of you that work in libraries, for example, have seen how the homeless are using the library facilities for connectivity. We want to understand that. We want to understand what are they doing. What is this creating opportunities to have more access to services, to transition out of homelessness. So we're very excited about this work. And in general, we want to engage with more partners, with policymakers, community partners, to help them to provide data, to provide evaluation tools, monitoring tools, to help better design, better target all the initiatives that are happening in California. Well, thank you, open for questions, and these are emails, mine and Francois. We have, again, Helen, who is doing very similar work in London and other countries. And that's the address of our general project. Right. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah.
If you would introduce yourself too when you ask a question. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Michael Banner, Los Angeles LBC. Given what you just stated about the households that had the problem with applying for benefits because they weren't connected, and everything you see payment systems are turning into devices, what kind of implications can you draw from that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And please, Francois, Ellen, if you want to come in on this Q&A. I think we have a challenge on the research side, but also on the policy and implementation side, which is to better understand this interaction between traditional fixed PC-based, laptop-based access and smartphone access. And I think there's no denying that the smartphone-based data plans have been tremendous for a large segment of the population, particularly the poor, particularly more marginalized. And particularly if you step outside the United States, Michael, if you talk about these numbers in the United States, outside the United States, you have countries with less than 10% home internet adoption and 90+% smartphone adoption. So the numbers are staggering. So we need to better understand what are the affordances, what can you do in one that you can do in another, and how, in many ways, you can transition some of the functions from one to the other. Like in the payment systems, we were, a number of years ago, we couldn't do that on a smartphone. Now it's even easier to do it on a smartphone than on a laptop. So I think we have many things to understand, and it's a challenge because you're trying to capture something that's moving so fast at the same time. But there's no question that we need to better understand that.
I think one of the issues here, and you started your presentation with talking about it. It's what are the outcomes, or what are the things that people achieve with the technology rather than technology themselves. So whether they're being connected. And when some of the research that we've been doing in Europe, which is a heavily connected nation, and where there's a big difference between the outcomes that people reach when they just have access to smartphones versus when they have access to a variety of platforms. Because it tends to be that people who have a PC or a laptop, they also have a smartphone, and they also have access at work, and they also have access wherever they are. So they have this kind of, whenever they need it, it's there, and they go in different devices, they do different things, and they achieve different outcomes. And it's often for the kind of really simple transactions, which is more like almost a passive use. So I need to pay a bill, or I need to, tick a box on a form that people can do on mobile phones. But as soon as it comes to things that really generate additional benefits, like writing a good CV or essay, or like participating in a discussion where you actually contribute with material that you've created yourself. So not just passively using services or consuming things, but really where you have to create and participate, where other people hear your voice, where you're actually going kind of beyond that. That is really one of the things that we see really hard for people who have smartphone-only device. Some of the research that we've done in the UK is starting to talk about actually something which is really important, is like what we see in smartphone users is almost a de-skilling. What we've seen with laptops and PCs is that the more you use it, the better you get, and the more versatile and the broader the kind of engagement that you have. But what we see with people who have smartphones, they can have been using smartphones for a very long time, and they're not kind of expanding their range of use or the kind of benefits that they're getting from it, because it's all very narrow platform. They learn how to use an app, but then if they have to do a similar activity in a different kind of app, they're often unable to do that. So they don't have those transferable skills that make you able to adapt to that very rapidly changing environment. So I think this is one of the fundamental questions that we're also working with in other cities and other societies, and it's really important to understand that.
Fernand, can you comment on that in terms of the research you're doing here? Is that something that you've already developed here, or a place you're looking to go?
Well, we've identified this as one of the fundamental issues of understanding mobile-only households, because it's growing in the U.S. and it's the default around the world.
Right.
So we've got to better understand, again, the affordances, the limitations, the skills associated with mobile-only
So
households.
can you comment on what research you've done for that area?
I have to admit, Susan, we are just starting this. This is
Okay.
an ongoing area, and I would say, Ellen has done some work. Some of our colleagues have some work.
Okay.
But I would say there's a lot of work to be done.
Yes.
We know what could be done on the smartphones, but we don't understand. And there's, and I think Ellen pointed out well. There is a danger in becoming where the internet only becomes around specific applications.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been interesting, for example, there's been interesting survey work where people in outside the U.S. This was done in various Asian countries, and people were asked, "Do you connect to the internet?" No. Do you have Facebook? Yeah, of course.
Right.
And the difference was 20 percentage points. People that said, "I don't have the internet, but I have Facebook." Now, then you factor in Facebook. What is it called now?
Messenger.
Free basics? No, the basic package.
Internet.org.
It was called Internet. So in other countries, Facebook has partnered. Facebook has partnered with mobile operators and offers for free. So it doesn't count towards your data allowance. The use of Facebook. Right? It's Facebook. It curated a number of sites for these users. So there's huge controversy around that. Which again,
So just to clarify, this is a scenario where Facebook is choosing where you go. You can't go beyond the sites that they have put within this bubble.
Facebook would not present it that way, but that's okay.
Okay, Francois had his hand up. Pete.
I want to make sure we get to the question, but just a really quick point that relates to your question. First is, what we're really trying to do with this is put together data that existed and identify interesting questions. That's where we are at this point.
Oh, okay.
And so we've identified some really intriguing and difficult to understand places. And our next step is to go after those questions. We can't do that with the available census data. It's not detailed enough.
Right.
So that's why Hernan was talking about partnership. We need to do some detailed, probably more qualitative data, and that's why we identify some neighborhoods for that.
Okay, so maybe before we finish, we can talk about what some of the organizations in the room, how they might be able to partner with you in more detail. But let's continue sort of diving into these areas that are bubbling up for people. So, Raquel, who are you pointing to? Somebody has the mic.
I do.
Thank you. Let's hear from you.
Oh, thank you. My name is Glenn Warren. I live at, no, just kidding. California School Library Association and advisor to CETF. My question for you, in your presentation I heard households. And I work in districts. And one of the things is we were diving into data that we collected ourselves because we wanted to know, we have a one-to-one environment in our district, and we know that everybody has a device, but we know that when they go home, do they have connectivity? And for us, equity is actually a huge moral issue for us besides all the other good reasons for equity. And we found that some of our defining households for us was more, we started shifting towards looking at families instead of households. And I'm wondering if that's accounted for in your research, because in a home that has, for example, has what you would call cable, there's a family that's in that home living with that family because they're homeless, but they're not using their Wi-Fi, they're using their mobile device. And also in our district, another piece is for transitory families. Transit families, we've applied iPads that have their own cellular data. Would that now count as not being online? So I'm really curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah, no, and all of you are really nailing all of the limitations in some of the work that we want to address as we move forward. So that's one of the limitations. We work with a data set that we both have households and individuals, but the main unit of analysis really for the census purpose is the household, which is our limitation. So we want to move into the direction. Let me just show you an example. For example, if you ask me the one about the elderly connecting, which is this number here, right? So this would say, oh, 75% of the older adults in California are connected to the internet. That's actually not true. What this says is 75.8 of the elderly in California live in households where there is internet connectivity. Whether they're using it or not, we don't know. And if you ask me, I don't believe it's 75%. I think it's much lower.
Well, I've seen them on Facebook. It's killing me, man. Can we lower that number?
So we have that challenge is how do we go beyond what we have in existing data sets? So far, as Francois pointed out, so far we've collected all we could in data set, and now our next phase is now what are the things that we want to know more? We want to know more about elder adults. Are they really 75% connected? I don't believe it's fair, but I'll love to be proven wrong. So again, we're working with what already existed, with limited resources, with limited data sets. As we move forward, we want to identify interesting questions, and how do we fund this research, how do we apply for grants, and how do we partner with organizations that want to tackle specific questions.
Okay, so we have Pete, then we have Sonia, and then we have Mark. Do you have any other hands? Robin, sorry.
Hi, I'm Pete Monzo. I'm with United Ways of California. And this might be jumping to the end where you want to talk about ways that we might partner with you. But just an observation. We do a study of the cost of meeting basic needs in every PUMA in the state. We did it 2 years ago. We're doing it again this year, so it'll be released in the fall. It maps perfectly onto this, right? 8 of the lowest income, highest stressed economically PUMAs in the state are in LA County, right? So which matches up with your 4 that I'm sure they're the same, right? So we'll be happy to share our data with you. But we've done text-based surveys because we do VITA outreach, so we connect with families to free tax prep, trying to connect with their income tax credits, so we have mobile numbers. We did a survey last spring, and we had about 300 folks respond. And we asked them about internet, right? And what was shocking was when you showed the 59% of people in the bottom decile, I think it was, maybe a quintile that had access, right? A lot of those folks are paying $60 a month. And these are families with below $15,000 annual income. So, we'd be happy to work with you to do more questionnaires to those people. And we just gave them like a $5 Target gift card. Right, at the end of the survey, they could bing and they had something they could use. Now, maybe that doesn't meet your survey standards, but we wanted to honor their time.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yes, we're delighted to look at ways in which we can partner. In fact, one of the partnerships we're developing is with Paulina Chavez from Everyone On. Is that correct? Which right, yes. And we're trying to develop a partnership with Everyone On in terms of first of all, the issue of awareness, right? As you raised, like so many of these households are not aware of this offers, and then what happens because these are really great case studies of families that move from no connectivity or very low and small data allowance, smartphone data allowance plan to full connectivity through one of those offers. So what happens in those environments? Particularly, we're talking about looking at specifically the public housing units where you guys are developing sort of specific initiatives, right? Is that correct?
I think it's the LA Common Zone that you're talking about, perhaps.
Okay. Yeah. Well.
I apologize.
Yeah.
Paulina's leading that.
Yeah.
Just
Sonia, and then
a quick point on this. There are two ways to collaborate. One is really easy, which is if you've got data by Puma, you give it to us, we can almost instantly create a layer where you would just check on this and you can compare your data with everything that's already there. And then the harder one is to say, well, we'd like to do follow-on surveys, and we're interested in both, but we want to make sure we actually do the easy part first, because that would be really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. This, if you have data that can map onto any of those layers, it really takes us a few hours to add this layer. I have to say, I'm particularly interested in school data. If you we should absolutely talk about this, because I really think we should. One of the areas that we want to show that there is an impact, that this is a need and an impact, is in education, is K-12. So we absolutely want to partner with all the data, but particularly schools. We're very much moving in this direction.
Terrific.
And Sonia?
Hi, my name is Sonia Katyal. I'm a new advisor, and I teach law at UC Berkeley. Hello, everyone. A great presentation. I'm sorry I came in late. So my question to you may be overly policy oriented, but I'm just thinking about questions of research design. And it seems to me that we're going through a tremendous transition with the loss of net neutrality. And so I'm just wondering if your research questions envision sort of recording the shift that will ultimately happen between access now and access after December 14th, and the impact on
really
data connectivity.
Yeah.
And then the other question that I have is, if this is not a part of your research design, I wonder whether there might be a way to record or at least survey some of the data now, as opposed to later, when I think your research findings are going to have so much more of an impact.
Right. Thank you for that. Well, again, it's obviously difficult to predict. We don't even know how this is going to play out as the FCC vote, and then the courts, and then so this might take a little while. But if you were to make a prediction, it would be that the United States environment would look more like what we see in other countries, where there is a lot more integration between the carriers and the applications. What we just described about Facebook partnering with the mobile operators, in a way that people start losing people don't quite distinguish between what the internet is and what Facebook is, or whatever other app is. So if, again, a prediction or something that you could expect as we move into a non-net neutrality environment in the US would be that there will be more and more integrated offers between carriers and the specific applications, and particularly on the mobile side. So if anything, we should expect even a bigger jump in terms of mobile-only households. And it'll be interesting to see in terms of the research whether that really plays out or not.
Wow. Robert Cicero, Supervisor Willie Thomas's office. You use the term intersectionality of factors, and a multi-part question. I'm wondering, you got right to the line of this, but they didn't quite address it, and that is, when you talked about the after 80% growth slows down, we've seen in the last 3 years the cost of internet go up precipitously. So is there, part one would be, did you look at the impact of the increase in cost as it relates to lower income communities and that slowdown? Secondly, when we look at the smart devices, now having the ability to have a hotspot, did you look at how are those hotspots being used in comparison to household internet? And then thirdly, families, are they selecting direct cable access over internet, entertainment over access because of the cost?
There's so many interesting questions. I'm going to just
go back to it if you need some help.
So I'm going to go reverse order. We don't have data in this data set, unfortunately, for cable. But I've done some work in other regions, particularly Latin America. And this is an issue I've been raising, which is you look at how many households have cable and how many have cable or satellite, whatever, and how many households have internet, and the numbers are astonishing. You may have 50, 60, 70% cable and satellite adoption with bills that are $50, $60, $70 a month, and you have 5, 10% internet adoption. So that raises a lot of questions about something that Alan and Francois were raising is not just about the availability, is the literacy. The understanding, what can I do with the internet? How can the internet provide better education for my children? Help me find a better job? That is often what's missing and what's driving. Because interestingly, in Latin America, in many regions, here we have cable and satellite going down. In some of the regions where the middle classes are going, cable and satellite are going up, and the internet is not, or the fixed internet is not. This really raises questions about what's the budget allocation within households and all these questions. To your question about prices, we don't look at prices. Price is, and I'll love to look at prices, is a bit of a difficult thing to study, and also because of the way in which pricing policies work in California, that a lot of it is blanket pricing for certain areas. I wanted to show you something that I didn't show in the presentation because it's old data, but this is something that we put out in our first report. Should be coming. So in our first report, we actually look at this, which is CPUC data. I'm sorry, it's a little small, but this is CPUC data. So from the CPUC, we calculated the intensity of competition between ISPs in Los Angeles County.
But telecom, not cable.
This is both.
This is both.
Both. This is anyone providing high-speed internet as defined by the FCC. Although they might change that now, but as defined by the previous FCC, let's put it that way. And how many competitors you have in LA County, how many choices households have in LA County. Orange is 1. So most households in LA County have a choice of 1 high speed, which is Spectrum Charter, or the combined Spectrum and Charter provider. And so this is what's driving prices up. I believe it's really the lack of true competition in services that's been driving prices up in LA County and in many other cities in the United States. And again, this is understanding that fixed or wired and wireless are different markets. This is just the fixed, the wired market. And I forgot your first question, sir. I'm sorry.
Well, that part was the first one, but it wasn't so much price, it was more driven on a cost parameter. Because, but where I see the deficiency in how it's looking is that if you don't look at cost, then you can't look at impact. Because if people are, like for example, in my neighborhood we have Spectrum. We don't have AT&T U-verse, but if you have access to AT&T U-verse, you can get a bundled package that costs less than what I pay for cable. And so with that, what it begins to create a narrative for is what is the right policy that needs to be put in place to address the industry so that there's fairness across the board in how people have access around cost. But the second question was, have you looked at how, like, and I'll use my house as an example. So when we evaluated our usage of internet on our AT&T phones, we can use it as a hotspot, unlimited.
Well, yes, the hotspot. Yeah, so we don't. So we don't have the.
Right. So
right now we don't have the data for that.
Right.
But we are. I know the LA Public Library have been loaning hotspots, and we've talked with them about maybe doing a study based on the people that borrow those hotspots.
Well, the phones themselves are hotspots. So that is what I'm referring to. So I can select hotspot on my phone, and instead of using my hardwired internet, we can use the one on the phone. So then it begs the question: do I need to pay $69 a month in addition to for a hardwired line, or should I just stick to my unlimited service on my phone?
So if I may take a point of privilege, this is an extremely complicated issue, but I wonder if some of the great research minds in this room and maybe others you know might be able to put some mind share around it, because what's happened is in poor communities they have what people call Obama phones, right?
Yeah.
Which was really started by Bush, not Obama, but we had an intern one summer map out the phones and the plans and the cost, right? And what you get with them. And it's an incredible spreadsheet, right? And it's just in, 2 communities. And the choices are crazy, from no data to data that doesn't cost anything, but is capped, to very expensive data, right? And, some say unlimited, but are they really in the fine print? And then tracking who really understands what you can do with this, much like your literacy question. But what we have found is that people do not have the literacy to shop for internet, right? And make these choices, as Robert was just describing, because there's so many factors and because they aren't fully thinking of what they would do with them. So they end up overspending, whether it's multiple devices or different types, or just taking the phone that's most convenient. But if we had some data about how people are making these choices, right, it would inform the policy questions, right? And then what people are doing with them or not doing with them. Because we have approached it much like we did with landline telephone service, right? Just find the right price point, offer it, cheaply, and then everybody will get it and everything will be fine. But that has not worked. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Michael has the mic, and I'll come back to Pete. Do we have other hands?
Can I follow up on the point that you just made, because I think it's good.
Okay, and then we'll go to Michael.
No, I think one of the important things is that how much this is digital and how much are we actually talking about problems that we already have a lot of research and information on. So, for example, these kinds of things, what we know about digital literacy, one of the best predictors of digital literacy is traditional literacy, numeracy and literacy. So rather than making people aware of all the the price plans and the digital stuff, what we might be more effective, although equally, if not more complicated, is thinking about, the stuff that we've been doing and we know is hard, numeracy and literacy as a basic kind of principle. In that sense, I think it's really important to not forget that if you don't have traditional literacy and numeracy, the internet is all text and it's all numbers, right? It really is, even though we're all uploading photos, but it's still, to me. So I think that, and it's an information society, maybe rather than a digital society in a way, like we need to know how to navigate. So I think that's one important point. And then the other important point is, I think, in terms of the research actual application, which was already mentioned before, and something that Hernan kind of pointed out earlier, is that kind of thing, if you do individual-based research, you will know whether people are using it or not. If you do household-based research, where they're like, how many people are in their household and is there one connection or is there, it's much harder. So, if you ask people, are you personally using the internet or are you doing any of these things on your mobile phone, you will get at that. Because then you will see, even within the household, that some people will be using the hotspots and others, even though there is a connection, they might not actually be using that because of other sources of inequality within a household. So I think those are two things I would say. I think it's numeracy, literacy, really important, and that might be where you really want to look at. And then the second thing is that there's an issue with looking at households and individuals. You need to look at individuals within households, individuals within communities, to be able to really get at some of these questions.
So for those like me who work in low-income communities and spend a lot of time there, I have what I think is a simple question, but it may not be how you answer it. Disparity that's you've been able to identify tracks with income and race. If you had to make a educated judgment about which is the leading factor, what would it be?
Well, that we're going to get it. So that's something we're working on, and again, this was our first look at the data. The next look at the data is when we build models, and in the models, statistical models, we can look at how much each of the factors, and not only race and income, we have probably a couple dozen factors that we think are important to include in the models, and we can disaggregate the effect of each of these factors very precisely. So that's something that's coming up fairly soon. So we will know quite precisely of the difference, what percentage of it is about income, what percentage is about race, what percentage is about gender, what percentage is about your occupation, or the place you live, or the community you live in. Because we know there's what's called spillover effects. The more people are connected, the more your neighbors are connected, the more you're connected. So we have a number of things. So that we can do, and we'll be doing within the next probably month or two.
Hernan gave you the careful answer. I can give you the non-careful answer, which is I think it's income.
Income, okay.
Well, I mean, there are areas which have a heavy percentage of African American, like the west of Limerick Park in the hills, where there is actually much better connectivity than Watts and in this area.
And I will go even further. I would say it's education.
Yeah.
Well, and
Not, yeah, it's the two, and it's the combination. Like in all the research that we've been doing, it's the people who are worst off. What we've been kind of calling it some controversially in some of our papers, the emergence of a digital underclass, a social digital underclass. It's low education in combination with unemployment, in combination with kind of a low background income, and being of a minority status. That the four things together, if you add health to that, you know that this person is gonna.
But I'll take issue with my colleagues here, because I think that's true, but it's increasingly less true.
Yeah.
So if we run the models in 2013 and we run in 2016, the 2013 models would say that income, race, and education are by far the biggest predictors. When we run the models in 2016, I'm sure we'll find that they're becoming increasingly
Income's
less
going down, but-
important as predictors, and more other factors are predictors. And Ellen has done some great work on this. Maybe it's also people's attitudes about the internet. Maybe it's also other things that are more cognitive, that are.
One of the reasons why I asked the question, because you hear this narrative amongst other things. This to me seems to be the next wave of how we talk about it. It's now with technology. The disparities, generally, in my opinion, have always existed around race, and there's been policies to do that. So, to the extent this is now the building block of where we are at the next phase of this, that's kind of the way I think about it.
But I think it's important, like income, we see in most countries as adoption goes up, the importance of income actually goes down, and the kind of relative contribution of other factors that are more cultural, social, kind of,
But that's outside the U.S.
It's also here. No, it's also like social. I'm talking cultural, social factors are becoming more important over income. But that's also because in general, costs have gone down. So if you have a situation where costs are going up, then it might be.
Which is I think goes back to your question. So I think the U.S. is not unique, but it's one of the countries where we haven't seen such a drop in access costs as we've seen in many other countries. On the wired side. On the wireless side is a different story. On the wired side, we've seen that this will tell you that we're really not going in the right direction in terms of the wired part of the question.
So my question, and I had a comment on that too, but I'll just save it right. Is this on that site you gave, the tiny.cc?
Yes, it is. Just again, this is the most recent data, which is unfortunately 2015. This is all the CPUC has.
Right.
I've been promised the new data will be out soon, where we have at least 2016.
I'm very excited to see that, because I've looked many times for something like that, right? Because I do think it's a policy issue. I mean, there's our policies compared to other countries, or to places like Kansas City, or places where you have Google Fiber. Our policies are, there's the personal aspect, right, which is education and income. And then there's also what's your infrastructure around you, and we allow that all that orange area where you have one spot, that's a policy choice. So we have to attack it from both ends. I find it interesting. I wonder if you compare, what's going on in some of these communities with places where, say, Google Fiber is available, right, or something like that, right, or where you have municipal broadband.
Is it a specific broadband or just multiple choices?
Well, first, is it very low cost and everywhere, or is it multiple choices but it costs me, right? And then you map the intersection of those other things like income and education against those, right? And compare would be interesting. I'm not saying that's easy to do. other surveys I've seen or studies I've seen of low-income folks and broadband adoption is very often they make a choice, right? The mobile-only people, right? That's the lifeline. I mean, interviews have shown a lot of low-income people, like, if I can't afford anything else, I gotta have my mobile phone, because that's, you know, how I connect to family, friends, have a place to crash, right? Everything else is secondary to that. So it may not be that they don't know or don't want internet, it's just like, it's a ranked priority. This is great, I'm very excited by this, that map.
And one thing we did in this analysis is we also checked where the fiber investments have been happening in LA, and that really tracks with income very strongly.
Right.
Fiber investments are tracking this, not so much cable and DSL, but fiber investments in LA County are tracking income almost one to
Right, right. Well, and then you have big carriers, I didn't say this, but like AT&T and others saying, you know, we're getting away from fixed lines altogether, right? That you know, you could definitely have another two-tiered system.
Do I?
Here.
Microphone? Okay. Thank you. So I work for Susan, it turns out. But so Susan Walters introduced the subject and our guest speaker, thank you very much, Hernan, for that presentation, and Francois for being an advisor from the very beginning. As I said to Ellen, he was in the broadband business before I could spell it, and so we appreciate very much. And Sonia, thank you for adding to the brain trust here in terms of researchers. The research has been really interesting and encouraging to us because it corroborates what we have been finding using different methodology, and not as detailed as anyone in this room would like, but we wanted to drive public policy and action. So the data is interesting, but it needs to be put to use. And what this concludes, points to, shows, is that we've got a cluster of challenges in very low-income communities. Digital access is one of them, right? And the policy that we keep probing, although the California Emerging Technology Fund has a mission to close the digital divide in California, we have come to the conclusion after a decade that really can't be done unless it's a comprehensive approach to tackling poverty. And it turns out there's a high association of people of color in poor neighborhoods for whatever is the history, the de facto discrimination, a whole lot of other things. And so I wanted to comment, even though I'm not hugging anybody tonight, everybody knows I usually do that, but I have a cold. I'm sure I inherited from Susan, so I'm blaming her. But we don't want to spread it around any more than we need to. We want to spread wisdom and not cold. So here's where we're at. But I did want to comment because we have come through a decade of work, and most of you in this room have been a party to that, very hard work. In fact, Megan will tell you that the California Foundation of Independent Living Studies wouldn't even partner with us in the first couple of rounds because they said this work is too hard and we're demanding too much. That is what Teresa Fabuzzi has said, seriously, because it's really, really hard to get to the outcomes of low-income households seeing that being online is in their interest and that they need to make a choice in their household budget between groceries and being on the internet. It's usually not the crisis they're in at the time. Although, as your questions have been raising, it is actually today more affordable to get a high-speed internet connection at home if you know about it, if you understand how to go through the process. It can be a nosebleed to sign up, and if you have a device, right? All of those things really come into play. Now, this is the point where I'm actually unabashedly going to lobby the County of Los Angeles. Okay, it is really great that we have County Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas represented, Supervisor Janice Hahn represented. This is 10 million people, you know, in the state of California, 25% of our population. And it's, as Susan and I and the team have said from the very beginning, LA County, LA region is ground zero for closing the digital divide in the country. It is true in California, it's also in the country. The information from the 2013 community survey matches what we have from 2008. And LA County, when we began, was the region the least connected in California. Literally, 48%. Yes, Pete?
Sorry to interrupt, but like, you know, we've been
If
doing this.
you're going to interrupt me, you better have something good to say.
I hope it's good. Well, you may be getting to it, but I mean, this map again, when, you know, we've been doing this for years, and until the Spectrum deal, we did not have an affordable offer
Right.
for most of that orange area.
That's right.
It didn't exist. So I don't know if you were getting to that or not.
I was going to try to, but no, Pete, you made a really good point. Until the Spectrum offer, and actually we have Frontier offer also in the Long Beach area. And Les knows that from all the work with the YWCA. We didn't have an offer. We also have AT&T offering in most of this area now.
But that's within a year, right?
Within a year. Now, why did that happen, Pete?
Because of the work that I think was the FCC required it because as a condition of merger, and that came because of advocacy work that had been going on to say, when there's a merger, which you guys have been doing, you need to ask for this.
That's right. Policy.
Right.
Policy that made the difference. And so that's really the first policy that has to be adopted by any governmental entity is it's our policy to get everybody online. Who wants to be online? And actually we know it's less than 2% who say they don't want to be online. And by the way, they're mostly elderly. And they mostly don't know that that's the way they're going to stay in their home with telemedicine. So then they would want to be online. Okay, I love this. That you're interrupting me and you feel you can't. Caesar.
Before CETF, we didn't even have the data
It's true. It's true.
to show this. So I just wanted to say kudos. So because of CETF, now we have data.
Thank you. We do have data, and what you've heard now from USC and Hernan is that we actually know this is truth. And, you know, we may have a little variance of a couple percentage points, although it's really right on. I am very impressed by how we're getting that data. And then Glenn, you raised the question about libraries and schools, and you sitting there with Michael, I really need to want to address this and take the opportunity, since you mentioned libraries, to say that Susan's mom, Rita Walters, was honored today by the LA City Library Commission. So that's a really nice point of opportunity to recognize Rita. A third of our low-income households and families have kids in school. Okay, 2/3 don't, but a third do. So those are both big numbers. 1/3 and 2/3 are actually big numbers. We can get to 1/3 of the kids, if you will, and their families if the schools if the districts who have schools in low-income neighborhoods said, we're going to actually provide a device to everybody and train not only our teachers to teach with the use of the device, their kids go home, right, Ellen? But then the parents get trained. And now the parents can check homework and grades, and oh my God, that's now embedded accountability that we take for granted in higher income communities, right? Libraries are also a great gateway. They are the digital hub for everybody who doesn't have access otherwise. And then for the 2/3 who are not, if the county who has all the human services, so the social services that are provided and through public health, through all of the child and family services, even through probation, and those are the biggie services, the clients, the customers actually get the information about available affordable offers now. And all of the community-based organizations in this room are your backup to help people through the system. That's hugely transforming.
So my response to that, I'm not gonna hold your mic.
Okay, you're not going to take the mic away, but you can, what's your response, yes?
Sorry. I won't respond to the standpoint of a solution. What I would say is offline, let's have a conversation about what that needs to look like. And then if it makes sense to do so, but there's some missing pieces for me here in the conversation. I want to make sure I didn't get to my other part of my question.
Good, okay.
Which is, you probably, if you haven't looked at it, you may want to. So there are other communities that have done some things a little differently. Of course, fiber fiber optics made a difference in a lot of cities, well, like Loma Linda. But cities who are going to smart meter technology, where they build wireless mesh systems to then become the backbone for free internet capability like Calabasas did. These are the kinds of things that I think need to be looked at, so that when we do look at how do we provide low cost to no cost internet for these communities of concern, is what I refer to them as, or other communities, all communities, that we begin to have that conversation in a way that drives policy for affordability and access. To your point about all of the other services, we, as you well know, our office is big on the intersection of all groups coming together. But I don't know that I would want to solve that in this form today. Does that make sense?
It's fair, totally fair, and looking at all the models, and those, the history of Loma Linda and Calabasas, they're smaller than some of this geography.
But what they are, even though they're smaller, I think they're good micro models, if you would, for what can be done in areas, so that if in fact, obviously to lay fiber optics throughout LA County would be a major undertaking. Maybe it should have been considered when we put in rail systems, I don't know. But with that in mind, what are some other things that can be done around smart meters, et cetera, that then help drive that access? And I think there's a conversation that needs to be had and looked at, because when you build these wireless mesh communities, you automatically build in the backbone for it without the fiber.
And that would be a terrific conversation with the board for you to take up. Great. The last thing I would leave you with is, so we've got many, can have different approaches, and there's also affordable offers that are beginning to, they will expire in 3.5 years. So there's a sense of urgency.
We would love to have that information.
Good. Let's follow up. Mark? Yeah, good. The research that you're doing and the partners and the timing probably couldn't be better. We're actually at a point, I think, with the California Public Utilities Commission beginning to have to implement the new law that got passed, that they're going to want to have the data and as immediate a feedback as possible. And that rulemaking process is just starting. So it's a great time for everybody to be involved. I really thank you for, this is prime that you came together. We are recording this, as Hernan knows, so that it's being watched right now. I want to call out to another advisor who couldn't be here, but new advisor to CETF, Denise Ducheney, who served in the legislature for a long time. It is from the Coachella area, so one of the top 5 that you found, and Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia actually was the lead author on the Internet for All Now Act of 2017. Do pick up your copy of this book so you can give us more feedback on what we missed. You can know what we tried to do in the last decade, but know what we missed. And my job was actually to vamp long enough while they poured refreshments back there. And so I will actually turn to Susan to see if she's ready or if she wants to make some final remarks and call her up. All of you know that for us, getting people online is in fact a 21st century right. We call it that. We refer to closing the digital divide as a 21st century civil right. And I borrow liberally from a civil rights phrase to say that access delayed is access denied. So we need to get on with it given how many people are offline in California. But you also have to have heart and you have to have some real spirit to stay with this.